In this video, I will be analysing the claims raised in a video from October 2022 by the One Path Network. They interview Subboor Ahmad, so I'll go through these claims and provide my analysis.
We'll get into it. To start off, if we could set the scene with a bit of a definition as to what is the theory of evolution, that'd be a nice place to start, I think.
Okay, that's a good question. The thing is, it's defined in many different ways, but to make it easier, we should define evolution as biological change over time. And as a general concept, this was known, theorized, philosophized about for thousands of years. Darwinian evolution, however, is something distinct. It's the idea that all life on Earth came from one single origin, the last universal common ancestor, and that the primary force that drove this evolution was natural selection working on random mutations. But the main thing, I think, before we even get into the biology, is to understand that if we are going to look at how to address biological evolution from an Islamic perspective, then we need to look at the philosophy of science. And some people may first think, how is philosophy of any importance here?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we just stick to science and lab coats and microscopes? Sorry, not microscopes. Microscopes. You can see how late it is. So no, the philosophy of science is extremely important because it shows you the parameters of science, the limits of science, the beauty of science, and also how to understand the actual place of science.
Right. And so then in terms of the philosophy of science, can you delve into that and actually help us understand from a philosophical standpoint, what is science? What are the limitations of science? What is science? What is the purpose of science?
Yeah. So when it comes to science, the first thing that we need to sort of unpack is this idea that science is the only root of knowledge, right? This is a common sadly, this is a common occurrence that you find people saying, I don't believe in something unless there's scientific evidence, right? And there's additionally another problem, which is the idea that science gives you absolute truth, that science is there to give you something concrete. It's never going to change. It's just written in stone. So both of these things have to be challenged.
This is a common angle that is shown in these types of videos. Of course, no claim is shown by anyone that science is the only root of knowledge, just that it is the best. Science never claims absolute truth. Science is always revisable with new data. That is its strength. There is no such thing as absolute truth in the scientific realm. Again, he provides no source that makes this claim.
Then in terms of the philosophy of science, can you delve into that and actually help us understand from a philosophical standpoint, what is science? What are the limitations of science? What is science? What is the purpose of science?
Yeah. So when it comes to science, the first thing that we need to sort of unpack is this idea that science is the only root of knowledge, right? This is a common sadly, this is a common occurrence that you find people saying, I don't believe in something unless there's scientific evidence, right? And there's additionally another problem, which is the idea that science gives you absolute truth, that science is there to give you something concrete. It's never going to change. It's just written in stone. So both of these things have to be challenged. Now, we don't as Muslims have a problem with science at all. Science is beautiful. In fact, there's an argument to be made that science actually flourished under the Muslim world, and the origin of the modern inductive scientific method even goes back to Hassan ibn Haytham about 1,000 years ago.
Hassan ibn Haytham was undoubtedly a great scientist, but the important point is whether he was a great scientist because he was Muslim or whether it was coincidental. He's shown to be an example of how pro-science Islam is, but ignoring the fact great scientists have come from other backgrounds, and in the modern era, Muslims have been underrepresented in terms of science.
So we don't have a problem with science. What we have a problem with is scientism, where science becomes into a type of religion, into something way more than science.
Here we get to the main crux of videos like these, attacking science, using the word scientism, trying to denigrate science to the form of a religion to make it easier to attack it.
And that's something that we're going to be challenging in today's discussion. So this idea that science is the only root of knowledge, let's first tackle this idea, right?
Yep.
So if I was to ask you, do you believe in Genghis Khan? Do you believe in Alexander the Great? Do you believe in Napoleon? Do you believe in his historical figures?
That's historical evidence. Testimonial evidence is still evidence. Somebody telling me what they had for breakfast is testimonial evidence. The issue is whether I accept that claim. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I am likely to accept trivial claims with little evidence, but more substantial claims require more substantial evidence. Of the type of evidence provided, scientific evidence is the best.
But then there's this additional problem that science gives you certainty. That if science is going to give you evidence for something, then that's just undeniable and it's just something we have to accept.
Again, science doesn't give absolute certainty. It never claims to. Science is always revisable with new data.
So the words like proof, words like fact, these are words which are very tricky to actually use these words to describe scientific theories. Now, we can use it, sometimes we can call a theory a fact because it's generally agreed upon and it's worked for a long time. For example, Newtonian mechanics. It worked well for over 250 years. If you made a prediction, where would Pluto be in 6 months from now based upon Newtonian mechanics, it would be there. However, it turned out to be false. Time and space were not fixed. General relativity, Einstein's idea, replaced Newton's idea. So
this is a common example brought up by people who like to portray science as getting it wrong, in quotation marks. Newtonian mechanics are an accurate approximation at low enough velocities. The problem arises at higher velocities and at higher gravitational fields. So in summary, Einstein's relativity extended Newtonian mechanics more than it superseded it. Newtonian physics work well until masses and speeds become enormous. Here is a great answer from the Physics Stack Exchange.
just because something is working and is empirically successful, and philosophers of science say this, it doesn't mean it's true.
Right.
It simply means it's working.
Yes.
I suspect he's using a philosophical definition of truth here rather than a scientific sense. In the scientific sense, truth is what most purports closely to reality, so we would consider a scientific truth if the model works.
Scientific data can be used to come up with alternative theories, to come up with alternative hypotheses. Scientists obviously have to stick with the simplest one, the best one, but that doesn't mean that is the right one.
Right.
This is true, but you should accept that the best theory may contradict your theology.
Whether it's the problem of induction or the problem of underdetermination or the problem of unconceived alternatives, there's all these reasons why philosophers are averse to the idea that science gives you proof, science gives you absolute certainty.
Again, science never did claim it provided absolute certainty.
And this is our starting point to actually start speaking about biological evolution.
This is his main point when it comes to discussing evolution, as has been shown in many of his other videos. The fact that science never provides absolute certainty is being used to trick Muslims into believing that evolution, and specifically human-chimp common ancestry, are speculative and should not be used to dent somebody's faith in the Adam and Eve creation stories, for which there is absolutely no evidence outside of theology.
now that we have this background knowledge and we take this in with us, what is Darwinian evolution, and how to, and also looking then into what Darwin evolution, what emerged from it, like this Neo-Darwinism. There's a bit to unpack there, but if you could just talk to us a little bit about that.
So when Darwin came, he gave us two basic ideas. One was a history of evolution with the universal common ancestry, the tree of life. And the second was that natural selection is the main driving force of evolution. Now, at the time of Darwin, we didn't really understand genetics. So later, when we had the science of genetics, there was a fusion in the early 20th century between Darwin's idea and genetics, and they call this the modern synthesis or Neo-Darwinism.
Right.
So now you get the rise of, genes being the unit of selection. In other words, the popular selfish gene idea, right?
Yes.
Evidence. But there's three things that I want you as a Darwinist to tell me whether they're true or not.
Right.
Firstly, that Darwinian evolution is based upon a probabilistic framework. Two, that it has assumptions which have sub-assumptions. And three, that there are disputes about its core ideas within academia.
Everything is based on a probabilistic framework. Even when you get the results of a DNA test, it still comes with odds of several million to 1, for example. That's a probability, but it is so outlandishly tiny that we consider it as close as reasonably possible to be true. Your second point is about assumptions. There are assumptions everywhere. Your faith is based on an assumption that your prophet genuinely received visitation from an angel. The question is how sound those assumptions are. Science is based on more solid assumptions than fairy tales. Thirdly, there are always disputes in science. Most of these are around the margins of what is currently accepted to be the most likely case. Creationists often exploit these discussions and turn them into major disputes. We will look into these areas in more detail in the second video.